Hello everyone and welcome to this video on Blood Brothers for a default essay regarding social class. This is to support you in your preparation for the exams and also to support you with your home learning as well. With this being a video, obviously you can stop and pause everything that we're going through, the instructions, the models on the screen, and therefore you can do this at your own pace. Okay? So the first thing we're going to look at is our approach to how we write a Blood Brothers exploding extract essay. Step one, you are going to figure out where the extract is from that I will reveal in a moment. Step two, you will make sure that you look at some areas of the extract to figure out what you want to say about it, but also how it relates to the question of social class. Now, 3 is enough because you can do something from the top, from the middle, and from the bottom, but you can do more if you have time. The guiding rule is that you should only spend 15 minutes talking about the extract, and then that leaves you half an hour, because you get 45 minutes in total, to talk about the rest of the play. It's really important you spend more time talking about the rest of the play because there's more marks available for that. And if you only talk about the extract and don't mention anything from the rest of the play, you are capped at a grade 3. Okay. So the next step, you will then, once you've written up your extract, think of some other areas from the rest of the text that link to social class. So ideally, you'll think of about 5 areas. If you think of 4 or think of 6, it's not a massive problem. But the idea is that you cover the whole of the text. So if you pick 5 areas that are all from, the first 10 pages, you're not showing the examiner that you know the whole text. So in most essays, you need to talk about the end of the play. In most essays, you're going to pick something from very close to the beginning, and then you've got to pick key points where the story develops in the middle and how those characters change. And then your last step will be to write, or your second last step will be to write up those areas from the rest of the play using your comment evidence development structure. Just worth drawing your attention to the fact that you should be writing more in a development when talking about the rest of the play, because you're going to be dealing with more areas of the text, you might be linking areas together, you might also talk about the writer and themes and feelings at the same time. So there'll be more to do when you're looking at the rest of the text. That development, particularly if you're looking at higher marks, should be a little bit longer. And then right at the very end, I want your last 1 or 2 sentences to be what we call a zinger end to the essay. This should be the cleverest thing that you know about Blood Brothers. So it should be talking about Russell's intentions. It should be talking about what he wants the audience to understand about social class and our world that we live in, the change that he wants us to see, etc., etc. You will have been given some guidance on this in class, but it's really important that this is the best thing you can say, and leave your essay on a high note and leave that examiner thinking that your knowledge of Blood Brothers really is top notch. Okay, so your reminders. A comment should be telling the story at a particular point in the play. Okay, don't forget you can pause this if you need to read this more carefully. You should be focusing on what characters do, what they say, what we know about them as people. It's quite sort of surface level. Generally, you are telling the story in the comment. You are retelling to show you know what happened. In the evidence section, you'll be dropping in quotations. You can use 1, 2, they can be 1 or 2 word quotes. It doesn't really matter. The evidence is the least important part of your actual write-up. It's just there to back up what you've said and to prove really that you are grounding everything in the text. The development is really important. It must question your comment. So for example, if you talk about Mrs. Lyon's behaviour at the start of the play, you need to be asking, why is she like that? What themes does it link to? What's Russell trying to say about her behaviour there? Okay, these questions will often start with how and why and what. And some good examples of some questions are here at the bottom. Okay, so what does really Russell think about discrimination of the poor in Liverpool? How might Mrs. Lyons be typical of the upper classes in the way that they treat maybe the lower classes? Use words perhaps like exploit or phrases like take advantage of. What does really Russell believe in the relationship between social classes and life chances? So for example, if you're born poor, are you more likely to have a worse life in Russell's view? If you're born rich, are you more likely to have a better life? What does Russell believe society, or why does Russell believe society creates the social class divide and that it's used to manipulate the working class? Does he think that they kind of create the world to be as it is because it benefits them, for example? Why does the play end in tragedy, and why does the narrator pose a question about social class to the audience at the very end? So that's a really good question because that allows you to think about those big issues. Now, as with any of these questions in the development, how you use them is that you ask the question to yourself in your head, you think to yourself, yeah, I know the answer to that question, and then the answer to that question becomes your next sentence after you've written your comment and your evidence. You don't put the question in the text, obviously, in your answer. You just ask the question in your head and you write the answer to that question. And if you want really good grades, you're going to ask yourself, a couple of questions, maybe 3 questions, and you're going to link them all together, and that's how you build up a developed paragraph in literature. Okay, here's a quick reminder of ways you can ask your own questions. You may have seen this used in lessons before, where people question the text themselves. So they'll take a word from this left-hand side, what, where, when, who, why. They'll take a word from the top, does, will, might, and you can make your own question. So you start with, for example, why, does, and then the rest of the question must relate to either themes, the writer, feelings, or message. Okay, you may build in an element of social class, but with this being the drama piece, there's no marks available for that, but it can help you to understand the themes. So I'll say that again. You're going to question themes, writer, feeling, and message. So for example, on this left hand side, why might Willie Russell be angry at the class system? Or why did Mrs. Lyons exploit Mrs. Johnson, or something like that? And the answer to that question should then be built into your paragraph, and that's how you're going to be hitting the higher band marks, assuming that you've done good comments and evidences as well. Okay, so the extract you should use for the purpose of this default essay is this one here. So your question is, how does the writer present the idea of social class in this extract and the wider text? Okay, so if you don't have the text in front of you, you probably want to pause the video now so you can see the text, make a few notes on it, and the first thing you want to do is figure out where it's from in the text, roughly. You don't have to be exact, and then figure out 3, maybe 4 areas if you're a little bit quicker at finding things that you want to say about this text. So something from the top up here, something from in the middle, and probably something from the bottom. So you probably want to pause the video now. Okay, assuming that everyone's now done that, you're now going to write up your response to the extract. You'll see that quite a lot of this is filled in for you. First of all, you don't have to use everything that's here. This is just showing you how you would do it to support you if you are revising or if you are at home. So in this extract, which is taken from the second half of the play, notice how we're not being exact, we're just saying it generally, where Edward returns from university for the Christmas break to see Mickey. Edward seems to be ignorant too. So here you want to be thinking about how their lives have changed and just filling in something in that gap there to show that. And again, you can change the other bit in the yellow afterwards here. If you feel like you need to change this, then that doesn't matter. But it's going to build to this idea of why is a job so important. You know, they've got very different attitudes on working and, you know, how their lives have turned out because they are of different classes at this point. So he's showing that because he has had a good education, a well-educated family, that a job to him, and so we're going to explore this idea of jobs and class. Okay, and so that's where you want to be showing there's a bit of a divide between these. So you do through the same thing all the way through. You're going to talk then in the middle about perhaps how Edward then goes on to persuade Mickey to go to a party using his wealth because he's got lots of money. They don't really understand each other at this point. Okay, Mickey doesn't understand this idea of having lots of money, so we could explore that idea there, this idea of wealth and the division between the classes, because that's again going to relate back to the question. And then something from towards the bottom. Okay, so again, you probably want to pause the video now, use this to help, but you don't have to follow it exactly. You pick your areas if you want to, but practice this idea. Yellow, you tell the story. Green, drop in an occasional quote. And blue, you question what you are doing in the yellow bits. You are questioning what's going on with the telling of that story, what the writer's showing, and any themes it might link to. Okay. After that point, you should be 15 minutes into your essay, and you want to pick 5 areas from the rest of the text, both before and after the extract, which relate to not a responsibility or a lack of responsibility. That should be to social class. And you're going to need to try and include a wide variety of characters and events that go from throughout the text. Okay, that was a little reference to my Inspector Calls version. So these references, you know, you've got to decide, but you've got to have that spread. So I would suggest something from near the start, very near the beginning, establish the difference between the characters and how social class is first introduced. Maybe be thinking about the idea of the children, the exploitation, you know, the sacking of Mrs. Johnson, etc. As you go through, it's going to be about how the children develop. So think about key areas, you know, sort of landmark milestones in their life and how they begin to realise that they're different. Maybe they are friends, they are blood brothers, obviously, but they do realise that each one is different. At some point, you're going to want to mention, you know, things about maybe jobs, university, Linda, and the sort of tensions that arise from all that, and how they realise that they're different. And then at the end, you need to do something with that final scene. You know, obviously, they both die at the end. What do we blame the death upon? What does the writer think about this idea of class? How does it link to superstition, etc.? Okay, so it's your job to decide those areas. So again, pause the video now and come up with your notes, please. Okay, here are some areas you may or may not wish to cover. The different ones are in order. You don't need to do them all. I mean, I said 5 and there are 6 here plus 7 about, the final message about class here. So you probably won't have time to do all 7. So think, if those are similar areas to what you've picked out, think about which ones are best and why for this question. But you must make sure that you acknowledge the ending. You must make sure that you understand what Russell is saying about class and why, class is really what, defines our future. And he's saying that's unfortunate. He doesn't think that's right. He thinks it should be who we are that defines our path and our future, what we're like as people, how much effort we put into things, how worthy we are, not about just how much our family, has in terms of money. So, try and explore that message however you address the ending, okay? So if you were doing the first section, you might want to do Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Lyons with the social class divide. So you can see here there are some quotations dropped in. You don't have to use the same ones. It's that, the quotation can come in variable points in the essay. You can sometimes have it a little bit earlier and then back it up with a comment. Sometimes you might want to often tell the comment first and then drop it in. Maybe you've got a second one coming in. That doesn't really matter. So tell the story of Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Lyons at the start, and then try and build towards this idea of what Russell is saying about the social class divide at the beginning, how they exploit each other, how the rich have always got what they want and the poor are always scraping to get by. So again, you probably want to pause the video, work your way through this early section. Okay, then you want to come to your next key area. So this may or may not be when they're growing up. So I said the next one wants to be as they develop. So you could do something about the section with where they have become blood brothers, the bike with both wheels on. These children are growing, they are developing, and they're realizing that they're not quite the same. They've got different sort of backgrounds and attitudes to money. Their lives are different in terms of how easy or how difficult they are. So you might want to also talk about their difference in their language, the swearing as well. So again, you probably want to pause the video here and talk about how they change. But as you build towards the development section, talk about what Russell is saying about that theme of class, what it's doing to them, how it's changing them, how even though they're genetically identical, they become very different people, etc. So pause the video and work through the second key section. You then want to be on key area 3. And so in this example, it's about how the policeman describes the incident differently between the children. Obviously, he treats the families very differently based upon their class. He's judging them. Do we think Russell thinks this judgment is right? You'll notice that there's less help as we're now going through because we're trying to hand over the onus to you in order to do this. So tell the story about what you know, about how they're treated differently. One's a serious crime, whereas one's a childish prank, and then think about what Russell is saying about this idea of class. Why, even figures of authority, the police are treating people differently. Is that right? Is that fair? Isn't the law supposed to treat everyone equally? So therefore, maybe the world isn't fair. Maybe the world is a little bit cruel and wrong. So think about what Russell's message is there. Then your next key section could be where the boys are now older. We've got issues such as losing a job, the armed robbery, prison, the drugs, going to university, becoming a bit of a bohemian, tilting his hat at the world, etc., becoming a counsellor. And obviously in the background of all of this, you've got Linda, with her relationship with both of them. So as this happens, the complexities of adult life are now creeping in. Life isn't as easy and as simple as what it was when they were kids. So you might want to do a bit about university here, how education is available, more easily to the rich and not to the poor. Maybe that's what allowed Mrs. Lyons to manipulate Mrs. Johnson at the start. We don't know. But think about what the writer is saying in terms of how education is there. It's kind of reinforcing class divides. It's kind of keeping them as they are. And then you might want to do something about this idea, the devil's got your number, the idea of depression, why is a job so important? There's a real disconnect here and they don't understand each other. Despite being blood brothers, they aren't close anymore. They're living very different lives. So again, explore what Russell's trying to say about that and try and develop those ideas. You've then got the section where the twins die at the end. Why couldn't you give me away and I could have been him? This is a really important quotation because it's trying to show that this idea of class has kind of prevented people from reaching their potential of what they could have been. That everyone is the same when they start off, but it's our environment, it's our nurture rather than our nature, to use that theme, which kind of shapes who we are. So you'll see that there's not much detail in here, but this should be quite a long section for you because I really want you to have the detail in here. So tell me the story of how they've now been driven apart, how that blood brother bond is broken, or ultimately unbroken, I suppose, in terms of them both dying at the end. It depends how you want to word it. And then what Russell is telling us about class versus superstition, education, nothing has changed. So what does he want to change? What does he want us to realise by the end? And that's going to allow you to build towards your zinger at the last point. Okay, and that's how you can come to this idea in this last section about the final message about social class. Do we blame superstition? No, because it's made up. Although Mrs. Lyons did make up one of the superstitions in order to manipulate and control Mrs. Johnson. But what actually do we blame? Well, we blame class. Think about Willie Russell and his background growing up. You know, he saw class division, he saw poverty in Liverpool. He's now trying to show the audience that something needs to change. What does he want to change and why, etc. And that's where you want to build towards at the end of the essay. So that rest of it should have taken you around 30 minutes or so, and then this entire write-up should be about 45 minutes. It probably took you a bit longer because you're stopping and pausing and listening to me as you're going through, and ideally, you know, you want to be aiming for about 2.5, 3 sides, depending on the size of your handwriting. And when you practice this again, you're going to be trying to get that time down right to a strict 45 minutes. You also want to be practicing for different questions as well. So you may, when you finish this one about social class, then rewrite it, but focus on, you know, the idea of Mickey and Eddie's relationship, for example, or how Linda comes in, you know, to the relationship. So there's lots of different things you can do, and I hope this has been useful for you generating a default essay on Blood Brothers.